Hi, this is Ch7, and I'm creating this video for application development to give you help with VS Chapter 7 assignment. So the thing with this assignment that we're building on is this auto postback. And before I get into the details, let me just say some general comments. Generally in web applications, what you're doing is you're interacting with the user and you're dealing with the database. We're going to get to that where we add database functionality to our web applications. But right now, with this VS Chapter 7 assignment, I'm trying to get you where you can interact with a data structure which has the data from the database already built in memory. So think about a situation where, for us, let's say this web application is taking ratings. And so far with a particular session, you've had 4 different people, or since we only have a session, it's the same person, but there are 4 different rating pieces of information. It gets a little confusing then because in the long run, we're going to have a database, so these 4 different ratings would be from 4 different people. Let's just assume that for now. Assume that you've got a database and the collection list was built from the database, so each of these ratings came from 4 different people, because that's what we're assuming in order to help teach you this technique. All right, so what's happening then is the user now is using the database input, and it'd have a place, a web form to enter their information, but they don't want to re-enter it. We haven't got to the point where we even do credentialing in accounts. So instead, they just check that checkbox and say, go get my information from the database. So I don't have to type it in. That's the purpose of that little checkbox. So you need to first create an event handler for checkbox changed. I've talked about that. Second, you need to basically make sure you add auto postback capability to that so that it will come and then return to the same web form without clearing everything automatically. Third, you have to add a method to your collection list class. Now, why does it have to be there? Because that is where the list is being managed. Not any one individual object, but the whole list. So there needs to be a method added to the list class to search the list. So in this case, instead of donations, we have an R list. And I drew this little picture to help exemplify what it looks like in memory. Our list class ends up managing as if it's just an array of objects. So you have to have a head to the list. So that's this, it's in memory, it's a variable, and it contains a pointer to the list of objects. So that's what I'm representing here. Then, every time you have a new rating submitted, you end up with this being extended down. Get this where I can do this in Excel. So you get a new one here, and you end up having a new little place in memory built. I'll move it over here like this, and I'm just representing that with some colors. We'll make it a different color, and then you end up with this new array place. You end up having a new pointer inserted. You have something like this pointing to the list head. Okay? Now, this method that you need to add, it's going to send an email address. And it's a method in the list class. And so it has to go through each object in the list. And it needs to then check. Because inside here, one of the properties is email address. So it needs to check, does the input email that I was given match? No, go on to the next one. It goes down the list to the next one. Does the input in the email match this? No, go to the next one, etc. So it's going to keep going until you get a match, or it hits the end of the list and it's going to return a null. So first, let's go ahead and continue with the list idea. See, this is a public accessible method in the list class. It's returning a pointer to an object. See, it's going to return an address to one of these. That's what I meant when I say pointer. So that's where you designate what kind of thing is it pointing at. It's just like a variable type. We've talked about how these languages, these object-oriented languages, are extensible languages. So now, here's the input to this method. You're sending it an email address. And this for each loop right here, that's a technique for processing through each part, each member. It's for each of the collection. So you're saying, this is casting. You're casting and saying, I need to say R is of type. It's just like you're declaring a variable pointer to a rate object. And you're saying for each R in the list, R list. Now R list is already defined in the class. It's a public variable to the class, so you just use it. And that's what I showed you here, that list pointer. So this is the code in the loop saying if the input email address, oh, it's over there, if that input email address equals the particular email address in the R object that I'm now looking at. If so, return R. Otherwise, you get to the end and return null. So the next thing then is you have to call that method to interact with this list from the code behind. The code behind of the web form where you're collecting data. So you need to have a checked box into change. And this gets set up for you, remember, when you double click on the checkbox. So now you're going to say, excuse me, let me pause this. Sorry about that. I just had something pop up in my screen. I had to deal with that. Hopefully I'm picking up where I left off. Anyway, let's go on. So here is the code behind. And it's just like you did earlier in this class where you added a new entry. Now you have to get the list head. See, you're going to your list class and then you're getting that public variable, the list head. That's what you're doing first. Then you're creating a local pointer to the rate object. Now you're invoking, now this is going to come out of your this little value here needs to come out of some text field, right? I don't know what you called it, but text email address, like it's a text box, so it's going to have something more like .text. Something like that there. But this right here is calling that class method that we just went over, get email, and it's going to return, it's sending an email address, but it's going to return an object reference pointer. So now you have to check. If it's not null, that means it was found, and you have to move your values from the object to the text fields. Else, you give the user a message saying that I didn't find it. We don't have a record for your address. So I hope you found this helpful. What I'm trying to teach you are techniques. So let me just end this little video by emphasizing that when you get working more in your web project, you're going to have multiple lists. and multiple little bean objects. So going back to that scenario that I talked about, a coach and soccer league web application, you're going to have a list that keeps track of perhaps coaches. It depends on what you're doing exactly, but definitely a list that keeps track of teams. And you're going to have a list that keeps track of the schedule. And then you're going to have objects in those lists for each game in the schedule. So these techniques that I'm trying to teach you with learning how to search through a collection list, that's the point of this assignment, one of the main points. So hopefully this helps. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.